Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today are Louis D'Souza and Anne-Marie Young. This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And we're especially happy to be live because we were having technical difficulties and they have gone away. And we like that because that means we can talk to you. So, hooray, we are on live. We're doing good. It's a good day. And Louis and Anne-Marie, as usual, we're dealing with the various circumstances of being alive. You guys were telling me before we got started how absolutely bleeding hot it is in London and England right now. So thank you for sweating your way through this program today. We appreciate that.
Our pleasure.
And we have a special guest joining us today. Her name is Sheryl Anjanette, and Sheryl is the author of a recently released book called The Imposter Lies Within, which she's going to be talking about and telling us about in greater detail. But first of all, Sheryl, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, good. Very good. So, all right, let's get right to it. It's nice to know that there's an imposter within that would explain some things, but, what's that all about?
It's so interesting because I was doing work with law of attraction, manifestation, and I was really looking at the reasons why some people just weren't manifesting, they felt like they were doing all the things, and they were putting it together right, but it just was sort of haphazard, or they were calling in the opposite of what they really wanted. And I kept hearing people, especially through the pandemic, talk about imposter syndrome. I have imposter syndrome. I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. I'm struggling with imposter syndrome. And I thought, okay, this needs a closer look. What is imposter syndrome? And how is it affecting people? And why does it matter? And most importantly, what could be the connection here to people really being able to manifest by design? I always say manifest by design, not by default, because we're always manifesting, as you know. So I started to take this deeper dive into this topic of imposter syndrome and realized that it really was this umbrella for all of these limiting beliefs and blocks and fears and the things that were creating this static, if you will, in our message, in our ability to truly manifest by design and not by default. And so I did this deeper dive, and that's where the book came from, this idea that the imposter lies within and the imposter lies within, right?
Both. Okay, so it's a play on words then. Okay.
So it's really this idea that there's a disconnect. It's not actually true. We have our actual accomplishments, and yet we feel as though we're not good enough. So there's something going on the inside that's not matching our actual reality. So that's the lying within.
I have to tell you, you hang out with an interesting crowd because I've never heard anybody say I had an imposter within. You think everybody was saying that, like, whoa, what is this crowd you're hanging out with? That's pretty cool that they all have the same diagnosis, self-diagnosis, so to speak.
That's great. But, that's where it came from.
That's cool. Yeah. And when you were writing the book, you were doing it with the purpose of trying to answer that basic question, right? Why is it that people have so much trouble manifesting? And it certainly is a topic we've addressed many times here. Some of us are a lot better at it than others. Louis, I like to tease him about this. He's like the best one on the whole crew. He just, snaps his fingers and stuff shows up. It's amazing.
Yeah, right.
No, but seriously, it's a topic we've talked about a lot. And so I'm curious to know what your take is. What's stopping people? I mean, are we talking about blockages? Are we talking about attitudes? Are we talking about vibration? What are we talking about?
Probably a little bit of all of that. But ultimately, I think if we take kind of a root cause, it really it goes back to our beliefs, And so that's where I go. It's, a lot of people deal with imposter syndrome with a lot of great strategies. So they look at the strategies. Okay, you're having fear. We'll feel your fear and do it anyway. And that's going to be the answer. Or, oh, you're experiencing self-doubt. You just need to realize, just look at what you've done and you can get past that doubt. And for the people experiencing this is agonizing. And if we do the deeper dive, if we really go in to our beliefs and our self-talk and our thoughts, the things that are going on below the surface, below the behaviors, we can find what some of those root causes are. And I always say that it's not so much our beliefs even, there's still a layer below the beliefs, which is our experiences. And it's not so much the experiences, but the meaning we've given them, the interpretation we've had of them at that age and at that stage. So if you go back to early childhood, you think, children, especially before the age of, I think, 7, we're just all feeling, we're all emotion. That part of our brain hasn't even developed that gives us the logical reasoning mind, the executive functioning. And we just absorb our world and we attach a meaning at that age and at that stage. So when we go back and we can say, oh, you feel like you're not good enough, but look, you are. The evidence is here. Look at all your degrees. Look at all your certifications. Look what you've done with your life. And yet this person is agonizing, with the ruminating thoughts and the anxiety and the feelings of never feeling good enough in spite of these accomplishments. And so we go back and we say, oh, when you were really young, you created a belief based on this interpretation that you had of an experience, and it felt like you weren't good enough. And then your mind was wired to make you right. So you started looking for this evidence of something else happens. And you say, oh, you see, I'm not good enough. Oh, you see, and it layers and layers and layers. And so somewhere deep inside there's this deep feeling, right? That's rooted. It's taken up root. Or feelings of, I don't matter. My voice doesn't matter. I try to speak up and no one's listening. I'm feeling unheard. Or, so why would I raise my hand in a meeting? Why would I think I'm worthy if I felt like I wasn't worthy? I wasn't worthy of something, So why would I ask for my worth in my business
So
if I feel unworthy?
So are you saying that the imposter within that inner voice is the source of the self-sabotage? Because, we're kind of talking about lack of self-confidence, lack of self-love, self-belief all the time, kind of thing. Are you saying that the inner voice is the cause of it? Or is it a symptom that goes along with it? Is it a combination?
Yeah, so you're talking about causation and correlation. So important. I talk about that in the book as well. Is it causative or is it a correlating factor? And causation is really the deep-rooted belief. Yes, the deep-rooted belief of I'm not good enough. And yes, that then informs our thoughts and our self-talk. So those are the voices you're talking about. So if I start with this experience and I give it this meaning that I'm not good enough, as an example, and then that starts to inform my thoughts. So a thought comes in of, should I do this or shouldn't I? And I'm probably not going to do well and I'm not good enough. That's going to start to inform our self-talk. And those are the voices in our mind that says, who are you to be doing that? Are you kidding me? You probably fail. Everybody's going to think, wow, why are you even trying this? Why are you stepping up? Or you don't belong. That's a big one. You don't belong. That's the voice in the head. But it comes from that belief. And really below that belief, the meaning we've given the belief. That's my hypothesis.
Okay, that's fair. So, all right, we've identified that it is playing to some degree a causative role. How do you deal with it? What's the solution?
Well, the solution is a holistic, the way I approach it. Meaning we have to deal with the inside out and the outside in approach. We need to dive back into those early rooted beliefs and uproot them, change them, So you have to begin first and foremost with the belief that beliefs are changeable, right? That growth mindset. So if you believe that you are not your beliefs, that you can change your beliefs, and oftentimes they're not even really your beliefs, you can reprogram that. So the first part is the reprogramming those deep early root beliefs. But it's important to remember that this is also patterned. So our mind, our brain creates these neurological pathways. We create patterns. And a lot of times people think of habits and patterns as just in their behavior. But if you look below the surface, you see, and I know you know this, so I'm not really telling you this, but I'm kind of speaking to this, is that our beliefs are also patterned and our thoughts are patterned and our self-talk is patterned. And so now we need to repattern, which means we actually need to work on that. It's not enough to just do the deep dive. In my estimation, I believe we need to also focus on the repatterning. The two together is where the magic happens. So now when we start to repattern, we're repatterning our thoughts. We have to catch them. We have to bring the unconscious to the conscious. We have to become aware of them first. We have to choose better thoughts, and we need to make the swap consciously until we create better neurological pathways so that those become the path of least resistance. And the same with the self-talk. So often, I just had a client this morning I did some hypnotherapy with, as an example, and she is a healer, and she was doing a big retreat, and she said, I was doing yoga, and as I was doing this pose, the guy who was leading us said, now pay attention to the voice in your head as you're doing this pose. It was completely outside of her conscious realm, right? And as she focused in, she realized the voice was telling her, this is hard. This is really hard. I'm not sure I can do this. So we need to bring that self-talk conscious, because it's kind of this chatterbox in our mind that we tune out.
Okay. We have a couple people in the live stream. First of all, hello, Michelle. And Marcus dropped in, and you're going to love this. He says, hallelujah. Is there ever a time to not use NLP? So, Sheryl, is there ever a time not to use NLP?
I think NLP, it's so interesting because I practice, obviously, NLP, and I have seamlessly integrated it into my tool chest. So I don't necessarily pull NLP out and say, now it's time to use NLP, now it's time to use EMDR, now it's time to use hypnotherapy. I kind of pull them out as needed. But I think NLP is incredibly powerful. The cognitive reframing part of that, but using it in a way with NLP where you're not just changing the thought, but you're making sure that the emotion and the image and the story is all connected. So often we kind of get a slice of the pie, but we don't get the whole pie. I always say it's like if you had a combination lock and you had 5 dials, right? And you got 4 of them figured out, would the lock open? No, it doesn't open, right?
Oh, okay.
Close. But you need that 5th dial. You need to dial that in for it to really open up, which is the manifestation. So, I mean, there's more to that, but this is the part where the imposter lies within piece kind of comes into play.
How so? Talk about how that comes into play.
Well, if you are looking at just a lot of the things we look at with manifestation, we're looking at, are you doing your affirmations? Are you paying attention to your thoughts? The thoughts are a big piece of this. And hopefully, if we're diving deeper, we're paying attention to the vibration, which is the emotion, right? Mm-hmm. What is the emotion vibration that's attached to that thought? And are we being congruent with that? But below that is still a belief. So we still need to make sure that we're not unknowingly, haphazardly having these other beliefs, these limiting beliefs or barrier beliefs popping in that we haven't dealt with.
Are you familiar with the teachings of Abraham Hicks?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things they talk about is that a belief is a thought that you think over and over again. And it sounds like you're kind of taking that idea, but kind of turning it on its head a little bit.
I kind of turn it on its head, and it's not to say I'm right or wrong. It's just another perspective and way to look at it. I think that there's less about right and wrong and more about what is really going to help somebody and help them get to the end goal. And I think different things work for different people. But I have this mind stack that I've created that I have illustrated in the book, where I really show it as a stack. But I think it turns. I do think the thoughts continue to create the beliefs. I do believe that. But at inception, I believe that and there's that belief word again, but I believe that the belief initially is what informs the thoughts. If one is to be stronger, well, I don't know that at any given time, one can feel like it's stronger than the other. It just depends on what's coming up. But ultimately, below that thought there's an original belief. So I have a lot of clients, for example, who really believe that they can do something, and yet they're not doing it. They're self-sabotaging, they're procrastinating. And they see the evidence and they believe in themselves if you ask them. And they're saying all the affirmations, but when we go into hypnotherapy, there's a very deep-seated belief of I can't, because I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or somebody when I was very young, triggered me and made me feel like I was, I've even had, the fear of failure, the fear of success. It's all over the board. Everyone is so unique in why they self-sabotage, or why they're not manifesting by design. They're not able to snap their fingers like Lewis and just call it in, right?
Louis is going to let me forget that. I know it.
Yeah, and I love Abraham Hicks, and I love what she, he, they say. But what I get when I get my own downloads, because I get my own downloads, is that we have to go below that. I get keep digging, keep uncovering. I think sometimes we stop because we have so many aha moments. And it's like, just a little more, just below that, that root. And there are roots. It's not like there's one root.
They can go pretty deep for sure.
They can go pretty deep. Yeah, they can go pretty deep.
Yep. That's why they call them roots, I think. Because they just keep burrowing down.
Yeah, so we have to kind of really pull them out. It's not enough to cut it off, but you got to kind of pull it out and tend the garden.
That's very appropriate. Okay. Well, I as you guys know, I tend to just kind of dominate here, so I'm just going to shut up for a bit and let Louie and Anne-Marie jump in with questions. I'll go to Anne-Marie first. You got anything you want to bring up yet?
I think you kind of answered my question. My question was like, what if it's so far into your childhood or your early years that you don't remember, but I know what that root belief is. Now, you've mentioned hypnotherapy. Is there many ways that you kind of go back in and try and identify what that belief is?
Yeah, absolutely. I love using hypnotherapy if someone is open to it, because I find that to be the fastest way to help somebody find that. But the idea that you will remember is in and of itself can create a block for somebody, because they think, well, I know I've got it. And then they stop digging. And so I think your original question, Anne-Marie, is still really important to answer, is why do some people not remember? Well, most people don't really remember those roots in their conscious mind, because our consciousness is only roughly, percentage wise, 10%, maybe 8%, 12%, whatever it is, of our full consciousness. Most of that is buried in the subconscious, and the subconscious has done its job the way it's intended, to protect us and hold things kind of, I want to say, almost buried or hidden. I almost see it like file cabinets. Like if you walked into an elevator on the first floor and it's sunny and bright, that's your consciousness, and you start going down floors and you go down and down, and there could be 20 floors there. And, you go out and you walk out onto a floor and you've got a bunch of filing cabinets. So our subconscious mind wants to keep us safe. It wants to protect us, and it wants to give us exactly what we want, as long as it knows what that is. And so when we go in, it's going to protect us, right? It's going to, something happens, it doesn't feel good. It feels uncomfortable. It feels unsafe. It causes us shame or any uncomfortable emotion. Or we're just not ready for it. It's going to tuck it away. So the chance that we're going to really find the originating event is unlikely. We may know if we know that we had trauma or drama early in our life, we may know that it's part of that equation, but we may not know exactly where those originating beliefs were. So I think hypnotherapy is one of the fastest ways. You can do it using NLP. You can peel back the layers with talk therapy as well if you want to go. Most people end up going to that for years and years versus just a few sessions. So I do think it's really a great way with a trusted hypnotherapist, somebody that has a lot of integrity and that's just guiding you. It's a great way to do it.
All right, good. How about you, Louie? You stay quiet until you're not, and it's time for you to not be.
You know me, I've got a lot to say, but the hypnotherapy has always quite interested me because I've offered myself up to be hypnotized quite a few times along the way out of curiosity more than anything, because I had rather a bad experience with self-hypnosis when I was younger, because when I was 18, 19, I started studying all these kind of things by myself in the library through books. My curiosity about hypnosis was always there, and none of them were ever able to hypnotize me. And I don't know. I mean, I've heard from some hypnotists that they can hypnotize the clever people, but not the dumb ones. But I'm not sure about all that.
I'm not sure that you qualify for that, but okay.
Yeah, I think just for anyone listening, and probably many people are familiar with hypnotherapy, but hypnotherapy is hypnosis going into that trance state where your brain waves just relax, slow down to a point where we can kind of bridge that barrier between the conscious and subconscious mind. And hypnotherapy is just doing that with a trained therapist, somebody that's going to help you navigate that. And just, if you don't mind just saying this before we go into hypnotherapy, because I think it's important. A lot of people are like, oh my goodness, is it like stage hypnosis? And are people hypnotizing me? And, that kind of thing. It's important to know that when you are doing this and you're working with somebody, I personally believe that we should never go back into trauma. I do never take my clients back into trauma or drama, but I do bring them kind of almost like an observer role before it, in front of it, above it, to see it, because that's where we can change the experiences. And the other thing is we go into a hypnotic state multiple times on our own through the day. So anytime you're in a trance, you're deep in a project, you're reading a good book, or, just driving and you kind of end up somewhere and you can't remember the drive, you've gone into that state naturally. So you probably were in a trance state unless you were really resisting it. Maybe your own internal, there's something inside of you that maybe was fearful. I don't know, Louie. I'm just throwing this out there, but because you had a bad experience, maybe there's something in you that was not fully trusting the process or what have you. I don't know. The thing about hypnotherapy is you are speaking, so it can be deceiving because you're speaking, you're having a conversation with somebody while you're in it. So a lot of times people will say, I just had a whole conversation with you. Are you sure? I was actually in hypnosis in a trance state. And sometimes some people don't go into it. But most people can if they want to, if they're interested and they can follow directions, and there's trust there with the person you're with. Most people can get there. Some people will resist it and it takes a few times. I noticed when I started to do hypnotherapy that it wasn't until maybe the third or the fourth time that I really went deep. I think I always kept myself back a little bit because I'm an overthinker. I used to be. I kind of trained myself not to be, but I used to be really an overthinker and very skeptical about these kinds of things. So I don't know.
I was an overthinker until I started overthinking it, and then I realized
that's probably not. So
No,
tell me
seriously.
more, Louie. Yeah, I'm curious.
Sorry, say again.
I said, tell me more about that thought process. I just wanted to kind of define the hypnotherapy, but.
Um, You see, I've always had a lot of respect for the Indian yogis and their kind of viewpoints on different things. And many of them have mentioned that one should not use, play, experiment, or delve into hypnosis. And, I always kind of wondered why, because, a lot of people do get very good results from it. And I've read many, many books on the subject. Some of them are brilliant, especially the ones that are based on delving into the truth of life itself using hypnotherapy. Many mansions. No, that's not, that's somebody else. I'll think of his name now. That's a fascinating one as well, but he doesn't really use hypnosis. But I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but it was fascinating. How he got to a stage where he was saying that they wouldn't allow him to know more.
Mm-hmm.
There were certain things that are held back, and I thought that was really interesting as well.
Well, I think, the subconscious mind is always going to lead you to the right place. It's important to work with somebody, a guide, who has a lot of integrity and really is just acting as a guide, not trying to put suggestions in that you haven't agreed to. So I do have clients that will say, I want to believe this. I want to feel this way. I want to get rid of this. But, I only add the suggestions that they've agreed to pre-hypnosis or pre-hypnotherapy and only with their permission. But I've also had clients where there was a point where we got pretty deep and then they just, okay, that's enough. And their subconscious mind said, that's enough for today. I need to integrate this before I go further. Now, in that case, there was some deep trauma, but yeah, I think there are different thoughts. And I think part of the reason certain religions or certain schools of thought might be worried about it is because you are going in and you are finding those origins. You are uncovering some things that were really rooted. And so if it's not practiced in a way that is really helpful with somebody that's really trained well, you don't want to be with therapists that you go in there and you find something and it's difficult to deal with and they don't know how to deal with that. You need somebody that can handle their client in those situations and know how to do that. So that's really important. But I guess it's one of those choices for people. They're either open to it or they're not. And kind of like everything else. That's why I have a lot of tools in my tool belt because I don't like to rely on any one modality. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you encounter a lot of people and everybody, like you said, is going to be an individual. So yeah, you got to have different tools for different situations because you're going to encounter different situations. I'm reminded of a situation when I was, how long ago was this? I was in my 20s, I believe. And it was the first time I ever encountered somebody who was, I'm not sure if he was actually an NLP therapist, but he was certainly very well trained in it. And asked me if I wanted to try to do something with it. I said, sure, let's give it a shot. I was kind of curious more than anything else. And the thing that struck me about the whole experience more than anything else was how completely conscious I was throughout the whole thing. I was totally aware of everything. So that to me, that's the best answer to the person who says, well, is it going to be like a stage magician who's going to make me do something I don't want to do? And no, it's not like that at all.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite different from that.
Well, I personally would like that to happen because then I would know that something's happening because otherwise I'm just dreaming, If you can make me cluck like a duck, I'll be really chuffed, I'm not scared of these kind of things. I really dive into all these things. I have out-of-body experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, to me, it's nothing to do with fear. It's more to do with, what is it? How does it work? Because I like experiencing things firsthand. So.
By the way, that's true. He's fearless. Let me tell you, there's nothing that he won't dive into. It's really true.
That's awesome. I love that. That's great.
What were you saying,
I was just about to say that at the beginning of lockdown, when things were going crazy, I was just eating so much sugar. So I actually got hypnotized to not eat sugar, and I did it with somebody in the States, and I just did it over Zoom, and I didn't eat it for 18 months. I just couldn't face it, didn't want it. And I was literally felt like a sugar addict and it literally just changed my whole perspective. And then I got COVID and I started eating sugar again because it's the only thing my body wanted, but not as bad as I used to be at all. But yeah, that was quite interesting. And my husband's had it to his fear of flying. And now he flies everywhere on his own, whereas before I couldn't get him on a plane. So I was like, you need to get hypnotized, otherwise we're not going on honeymoon. It's just not going to happen.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, things like smoking, that's easy. I mean, smoking is one session, one and done. That's an easier one to make sure it lasts too, because you can really show somebody like some pictures of what their lungs look like, smokers' lungs, and the ick is really, really bad, Yeah. Sometimes it's harder to show what the ick looks like, but it's also a lot going on inside.
So you think that ick is important to show then?
With certain things, yeah. If you're trying to change a really unhealthy, bad habit, it's good because our subconscious mind thinks in stories and pictures. So the ick it's interesting. I had a client that I was working with I'd never like to say weight loss because, our subconscious mind wants to find whatever we lose. So weight reduction, shedding some weight, and not just
shaping up. Shaping up.
Yeah. And we had worked in one session on, the healthy food and loving the healthy food and the ick for like the fast food. And she maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, she said, we had not prepared. We were going by a Jack in the Box. And I said, what the heck? I'm going to just get some. And she said, my whole body blew up. I have like, look at me, like I have rashes on my skin. Like I feel like so gross because we had put the gross in there to the point where just the idea of eating that fast food again was not going to happen.
Yeah. But I have to admit, I've never totally understood the fast food addiction thing. Because to me, the food itself is enough to drive you away. But apparently that's not the case for most people.
It's really food. That's why most of it is like manufactured chemicals. Don't get me started on that. That's a whole
So Sheryl, when you're with somebody and you're going back into that root belief, you've mentioned that you change it. So are you changing perception? Are you changing the event? What is it you're changing for that person?
It's really the story. So look, the experience happened. We're not going to actually change an experience. It happened. You're not going to tell somebody that didn't happen because truly they're not going to believe that. And it did happen.
Yeah.
But what we do is first and foremost, it's a little bit of inner child healing at the same time. So that's why I say it's sort of, you end up using multiple modalities. So we want to, usually when a child has these feelings of not good enough or not worthy or not deserving, or I don't matter, or I'm not lovable, they're wounded. Something happened, that event happened. And so first and foremost, we want to acknowledge them and we want to let them express, because at that age, they're not using their words. They're all feeling, but they're not expressing themselves and they have no control over their environment, right? So first and foremost, it's just letting them express that, because it's a repressed emotion. And then you can be there for them and show them, look at you. And then if there's a false perception, we can help them understand that now, because now we can bring the cognition into the equation that they didn't have. So for example, I have a client whose mother, when she was in the sandbox at 3 years old, and her mother came, and all the other daddies that day for some reason came to pick up their kids. And she said, "Where's my daddy?" Well, her father had died when her mother was pregnant with her. And her mother was so sad about it that she started to tell her, and then she started to hit herself and cry and just couldn't deal with it and was sobbing. And so all she heard was, "You don't have your daddy. Your daddy died when I was pregnant." And that's all she remembered. And she ended up with all kinds of eating disorders and disordered eating, I should say, and all kinds of issues, very accomplished, amazing person, petroleum engineer. I mean, amazing person who just had so many difficulties to overcome all of her life because of this core belief, So we were able, you're able in that moment to say, look, this is what actually happened. It wasn't even your fault. You took this on as though it was your fault that mommy was sad. It was your fault that daddy died. Can you see that it wasn't your fault? So now also the actual meaning that was given to that experience is what's kind of crucial. The interpretation of that experience is usually it's my fault or I'm not lovable. If somebody didn't show me love, it's because I'm not lovable. Kids don't stop loving their parents. They stop loving themselves. So, we are able to change the meaning they gave it. So we let them express, we let them understand, we hear them. Children are usually wounded because they didn't get something they needed, like nurturing, or they got something they shouldn't have gotten, maybe abuse or harsh word or, whatever it was. So we try to fill that in at that moment, and then we give them a new belief. You are good enough. You are amazing. Can you see that now? And they get to repeat it, and then that actually starts to change their whole timeline. It starts to percolate through the whole timeline. There's more to do because things happen at different ages and different stages. A 3-year-old that's wounded is going to be quite different than a 12-year-old that's wounded, right? Or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. So there's a lot of in those beliefs, a lot of this inner child work that gets done.
Sheryl, have you heard of timeline therapy?
Yes, that's what I was just describing.
Right, I thought you might be. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It really, really is interesting, the effect of.
It's interesting, and it's powerful because it works. And I stop really naming everything I do sometimes because I do start to integrate it. I'm really a big believer in integrating, but using timeline therapy, I'll use it going forward as well. So for example, with weight reduction, we'll future pace in timeline therapy through hypnosis and make sure that people are connecting to their future self so that they can really envision and feel and see themselves as healthy and, at their desired weight and all that.
It might be helpful for the listeners to just understand what timeline therapy is. I think it'd be good for you just to explain that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when you go into a hypnotic state, you're basically, again, relaxing the mind, and we bring somebody into a place where they feel very, very safe, their own place. This is the way I do it. And so you get to choose your place. It could be indoors, outdoors, a known place, something you make up in your mind, but it's your place, and it's a place you can always go back to with or without me. So as the hypnotherapist. So it's a place now, if somebody has found that place now and they feel really safe and we set that in, they can go back to. And once they have their safe place, because you want to have an anchor point, right? Of safety, of love, you're enough, you're good. And then we bring them up and we have them almost like you're floating. You come up over yourself, you see yourself where you are, and you can see your future and you see your past. So now you get the whole of it. Where you are today, that there's a future out there. What is that looking like now? Sometimes I've had clients that haven't even been able to look to the future because there's so much fear. And I've had others where it's really bright and we look to the past. And then to go back, we simply float back. So let's say in our pre-talk, you're saying to me, I'm always procrastinating. I feel like I start to do something and then I stop. I don't know why. I just don't know why. And, so we start to get into what are the things that are really showing up in your life right now? What's happening? And we start to go back. And we start to go back to the first time you felt like you needed to stop, you needed to wait, that you shouldn't move forward with something because you weren't sure and what was going on. And we'll go back for any situation as far back as someone can remember. Usually people will get to around 5 or 6 years old. I find by the second or third session, they can even get back to 3 or 4. The other thing I do for those who believe in this is I'll bring people back into the womb, and I'll bring them back to before the womb. And I also do past life regression, but I'll bring them back, and we can go into who are you just as a soul, as a spirit that's chosen to come into this life. And so often remembering who you are, just remembering that you chose this cast of characters, you chose these lessons to learn, and going back into that timeline therapy. Now, as you go through and you see the hard times, with the understanding that you chose these characters, these people, and these lessons. So what can you gain from it? It creates a completely different perspective. So that's really kind of the high level of it.
Mm-hmm. The way it was explained to me was fascinating because they said, think of something traumatic that happened to you not so long ago. So let's say it was a divorce or whatever. And then they said, okay, now go back in time. And then they said, okay, so you've just met the individual. How do you feel now? So there was still anxiousness, etc. at that stage. So go back before you even met the person. You didn't even know they existed. And then suddenly you start finding there's a place along the timeline where you have no fear or worry at all because the person didn't exist in that timeline. And so the weight of that challenge or that problem was completely removed. And, I took a few events in my own life and did it. And it was really fascinating that the weight that you'd carried in the present moment of it completely removed just by going back in the timeline. And I thought it was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the idea of what you explained is exactly, it's the same using timeline therapy, and the approach is just a little bit different. And so you can use timeline therapy going back in many, many ways. That is one of them. And so often we're connecting it to present day behaviors or realities, things that, are showing up that we don't really like. We'd like to change.
Well, we're associators, aren't we? We associate all the time.
Yes.
So it's not a terribly big surprise that we're going to build associations based on root behaviors or root experiences that date back a long time that have never been uprooted. I mean, we're going to find something to associate with, and sometimes it's going to be that.
Yeah. And there's the emotional quotient too. So the emotion attaches, that's the energy of it. And so that energy is the emotion. So this is the way I look at emotions and feelings and thoughts. Emotions are what we feel in our body, right? We have the vibration. We have a physiological response. We know what fear feels like in our body. We know what happy feels like in our body. We know what love feels like in our body. We know what shame or blame or anger feels like in our body. And the feeling is the story we give that emotion. So that's the narrative, right? So when you change the narrative, you can actually shift the emotion. And the thought can help change the narrative as well. So the thoughts, emotions, and feelings kind of play together in the sandbox.
To what degree does the direct conscious intention of the individual play in this overall process of learning to get past these things that are stopping us, so to speak, from manifesting the kinds of lives we want to have? And in what way does that conscious mind and that conscious interaction also interact with what you do in the hypnotherapy or the NLP segments? In other words, do they work together or do they work independently? How much overlap is there?
No, I think there's a lot of overlap. I think it's essential to have the conscious intent. It's not enough, but it's essential. It's like a starting point. It's almost like if you don't have awareness, where do you begin? We have to be, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't have a conscious intent. Now, can somebody who absolutely does not want to be hypnotized to stop smoking. Can they be hypnotized to stop smoking? Yes, it can happen. It can happen, but there's just so much more to get over that, right? Somebody really should desire, want. And I know a lot of hypnotherapists, and I'm one of them, that won't work with people unless they have that conscious intent to begin with. So, conscious intent is the will, right? But the power comes below the surface. Will alone isn't enough. You need to power that will.
So they need to be basically trained to work together in a sense.
Right. And then are you familiar with the idea of secondary gains?
I don't know that phrase.
Are you, Louis or Emery?
No, I'm not.
No.
Nope.
All right. So secondary gains are really the subconscious, unconscious, secondary intent that we are not looking at. So for example, I say I want to reduce weight, let go of shed weight, whatever you want to say. And it's hard for me to even say that because I'm so conditioned to say lose, but lose the lose.
Lose the lose. There you go.
Lose. Yeah, shake it. Let's shake that weight, right? So I say, you know what? I know I have this intent, and I am absolutely determined to do this. And I see myself healthier, thinner, wearing my clothes, feeling more attractive, whatever it is. Playing with my kids, playing with my grandkids. But there's a secondary gain that could compete with that, almost a competing motivation. I like food and I like freedom, and I like to eat what the heck I want to eat when I want to eat it. And I don't want to have to do all this preparation. And, sugar tastes good, right? Mm-hmm. And it hits that dopamine center. And, when I'm out with friends, it's social. I want to drink. I want to eat. I want to not have to be regulated. So now I've got the secondary gain. So intent is important, but a lot of what the work I do is when we're uncovering and discovering is we figure out what those secondary gains are, if they exist. Not always, or they're so light. And you do this thing, and this is NLP, going back to someone's question about NLP, this is where you can minimize a trigger and make another trigger stronger. So you minimize the secondary gain. Do you completely eliminate it? Well, with, food, probably not completely, because that would be like telling yourself a lie. That food, it doesn't taste good. It does taste good. Or you change the story, which in my case, it doesn't taste good to me anymore, because all I taste are the preservatives and the dead food and it doesn't taste good. I mean, I like my food to be alive. I like it to be healthy. I like to feel like it's nourishing me. And I like the people around me to be the same. I like them to nourish me, and I like the thoughts in my head to be nourishing. And so I've trained myself, but it took a while to do all of that. So intent is important, but we need the will. We need to understand if there's something lurking below the surface that's sabotaging that secondary gain, for one.
Well, there's also ongoing programming that we do, even if we aren't working with a coach. I mean, our minds are, by their very nature, they are reprogrammable. Our brains are.
Absolutely.
The system is built, so we're constantly doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for everybody else, but I know you mentioned sugar. For myself, there are times when, we'll go out for ice cream or something like that, and I'll enjoy it. There are other times where this is something that would have shocked the heck out of me when I was, 30 years younger, but I just can't even tolerate the idea of sugar at times. It's just, ugh. So I can tell there's two modes of programming that's been going on there. One hasn't completely eliminated the other, but they're both kind of at play, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is it different programming, Walt, or is it or are you listening to your body? And your body sometimes needs more salt on sunny days when you're sweating, and other days, I remember when I was hiking and camping as a kid, in the middle of the day in South Africa, we would stop for lunch, and Dad would bring out this isotonic game mix, which is just like a powder, and we added the water, and then he used to add salt and salt and salt. And it used to taste absolutely delicious. And I remember when I was at home one day and I thought, wow, I want to have some of this delicious isotonic game. I made it and I've added loads and loads and loads of salt and I just spit it out, you know. So, you know, your body, you know, it's also you just listening to your body what you want. Like the ice cream van came around today and I was like, oh, I want an ice cream today. I just don't feel like it.
Yeah.
So there's different elements to it as well, I think.
It's a complex topic. I think that's really what we're driving at here, that there are many modalities. There are many things we can do to work on ourselves, to get help from others, and so on and so forth. And so that gives us a lot of choice. It gives us lots of options. But it's going to be a different combination for every person. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, finding your own combination.
Sheryl, I'm curious before you go, because we're running a little bit long time. I think you mentioned that you've done different healing arts, I think, and I've done quite a bit myself. So I'm curious which ones you've been around or exposed to.
Sure. So in hypnotherapy, I've studied multiple modalities. So Ericksonian cognitive behavioral, past life regression, trying to think all of the ones.
So I'm just going to pause you there. I'm talking about working with energy as opposed to healing arts. So
energy also, NLP, of course, I told you. I did Reiki.
Okay.
But I found that when I started working with energy, that my hands would just start doing their own thing, and my energy healing isn't necessarily anyone's modality. It's just what kind of comes through me.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I discovered that I have some medium abilities, and I tend to get visited when people want me to channel them, or when people are just transitioning, if they're having trouble getting over to the other side. I've helped a number of souls kind of transition over. And really, it's just, I'm still learning, Lewis, to some degree. I'm just an open book.
Aren't we all?
I wrote a book, but I don't necessarily think I'm like, a lot of my book came through me too. If you'll notice, it's just, if you read it, it's so different than anyone else's take on imposter syndrome. There are a lot of things that are similar, but you know, I really say you can get past imposter syndrome. You don't just have to get through it. You can get past it. And I show people how to do that. And, you know,
what I find quite interesting is I'd never heard of imposter syndrome until you mentioned it.
I feel so much better now.
And it sounds like that you've heard a lot of people talking about it.
Yeah.
It's like,
I've heard it before.
Have you?
Oh, you have? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Before the pandemic, something like 70% of people identified with it, 70%. And since the pandemic, it's more like 85%.
Wow.
It's very, very common. Very accomplished people, Albert Einstein, Maya Angelou, Tina Fey, Sheryl Sandberg. I mean, the list goes on, people that have actually talk about it. But most people kind of, you know, they put on their confidence suit, they fake it. They don't fake it, but they put on their confidence suit. They're out there. They seem very confident. We don't realize that they're ruminating and they have, you know, chronic stress and anxiety, and they're worrying that they've, you know, done everything right. And so I actually go through 7 archetypes for people to have a framework to see how it's showing up. So there's a self-assessment. And then I future picture them. What does that look like to be past imposter syndrome? And it doesn't mean that you're past fear. It doesn't mean you're past doubt. It doesn't mean that, you know, you stop comparing yourself. It's just these things are all in what I call the healthy zone. The healthy zone that's adaptive, the way we're meant to be, versus this maladaptive zone where it really holds us back.
Yeah.
It's funny because as I think back to my own development over the 10 years or so that I've been doing the podcast, that's really when I started doing some serious work on myself. I think about my own progress that I've made. And certainly when I started this whole process of doing this podcast, I definitely had voices going on in my head. And I actually reached a point where I was sick of them and wanted to do something about it. I ended up using mirror exercises at the recommendation of an article I saw by Jack Canfield, the author of the Chicken Soup series. When she said that doing mirror exercise would eliminate it. I said, okay, I'll give that a shot. Gave gave it a shot for 30 days, and sure enough, it worked. They went away. And I've lived without those voices for so long now. I mean, I do occasionally get a voice going on in my head, but it's not like it was before. So I guess I've kind of forgotten what that's like. That because when you're in the midst of it, when you're living with it day to day, oh my goodness, they can just kind of take over. And it's a different experience.
So, Walt, I'm curious about this because I don't think we've talked about it much. Are these thoughts just thoughts that you don't want, or is it really like you're seeing, hearing, feeling an alternate entity speaking through you or to you?
I can't tell you that I can give you a clear answer on that one because I've thought both ways. There was a time before I started doing the podcast where I literally thought there was somebody out there trying to undermine me, and my wife can tell you about that.
Was the talking?
I call them the
bully. Let's all talk at once.
We've touched a nerve here. Everybody wants to say something.
Yeah, I think I've lost the plot now.
It's funny. It's funny because I call them the bullies in your brain, the sabotage bullies, and I have them in the book, and I actually am doing a voyage right now past self-sabotage with the group. I call it a voyage because we have to journey. We have to go somewhere. We can't just have another friggin' course. And the bullies in your head. So with our self-talk, what happens is we almost tune it out, right? Or it almost feels like it's someone else talking. And yet those voices are different voices. We know the inner critic because that's the one that's really loud and proud and wants to take center stage. But there are other voices in our head, and they can feel... Sorry, I have some other voices downstairs now.
The voices have arrived.
They're in my head.
Yeah, the dog got groomed. So anyway, we have these other voices. And so I give them names to just give it, can you hear them? It's like 110 pounds. I give them voices. I give them names. And it just gives some levity. So there's like fear-mongering Freddie and Doubtful Dee and experienced Ethel. And, it's like that voice starts talking and you're like, oh no, you are not doing this to me again. No. We got to change this conversation. But just like any voices, it can almost, like Lewis said, it can almost feel like it's coming from outside of you, because we are not our thoughts. We have thoughts about our thoughts. And our self-talk is all changeable, but most of the time it's just, we tune it out. We numb out to it. But what's important here is that our subconscious mind is always listening. So we may consciously tune it out. Our subconscious mind gets every word, every vibration, every bit of it. So it's important, really, really essential to change that, to bring it to the consciousness, choose a better conversation and swap that out.
Do you know what I do? If I hear that voice and I catch it, I've got another voice that goes, that's a lot kinder. So I'll go, that's not the case. You're actually really amazing and you're clever and you've got this and you can do it. And that's not the truth.
So you actually have the two angels. You got the better angel and you got
I've literally got a whole party going on in my head while there's like a little disco. But yeah, if I catch that voice, I do. I put another voice, go, that's not true. That's not true. You are this, you are that. And it's more nurturing and more maternal and builds me back up. So I catch it. Coach.
That's the
you know what amuses me no end here is I think you guys are all mad.
Yeah, we are. You got a little party going on.
Sheryl did stimulate the question again in me, Walt. I wanted to know, were those thoughts in your head or the voices, were they talking about what you wanted or what you didn't want?
When I had it, it was...
No, Walt.
Oh, me?
Oh, Walt. I thought you said Sheryl.
No, I did say it reminded me of the question. I forgot. Thanks.
It was a mixed question. To answer your question, it was sometimes voices telling me things I didn't want to hear, and there's other times voices telling me things that didn't make any sense to me. And occasionally it was a voice telling me something that I liked that I didn't believe.
Wow.
See how that goes back to the belief and all the stuff that's buried in there.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a treasure chest.
It is. The human mind is really quite remarkable. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. We talk a lot about and hear a lot about what it's like to be connected to source and larger parts of ourselves and so forth. And I'm sure all that's very fascinating, but just the little part we're dealing with here is pretty fascinating. I think it's amazing, actually.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I feel like it's really important. It's wonderful if we can connect to source and we can do this for ourselves, but I really feel like we need to help those who want to be helped, that are on the climb, that are ascending.
hmm
I think that's my place, is in those that I don't go deep to the people that aren't interested, but those who are interested, to help them with that ascension.
Well, then toward that end, we got to ask you the most important question of all. How do they find you?
As long as you know how to spell my name, I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, so we'll start
Sheryl.
there.
Yes, Sheryl with an S, Sheryl. Anjanette is Anjanette. So it's 2 T's, 1 N. So you can find me on, my website is SherylAnjanette.com. You can find me on social media. LinkedIn generally and Instagram are my two, bigger ones, I guess, that I pay attention to, sort of.
Okay.
Yes. And then the book is available, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, if you're in the US, online. The Imposter Lies Within.
Sounds good. That's great. Thank you, by the way, for the work that you're doing. Because the people like you who are trying to reach out to those who don't necessarily know the kinds of stuff we talk about here, but are looking for help, you're playing an important role. And so, I'm trying to make this a practice most recently of appreciating the things that the guests are doing, because every single guest is bringing something great and you're bringing something great. So thank you for doing what you're doing. We really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow. This has been a great conversation. Really amazing.
Glad you liked it. That means we achieved our goal. We had your daily dose of happy once again. Ding, ding, ding. Love it.
I love that.
So thank you guys very much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.